Hello, dear friends. Today, I continue to bring you an extremely interesting story. Prepare some tea, and we will start the journey to explore the story right now. Sarah's mornings always followed a predictable rhythm. At the crack of dawn, she would shuffle out of bed to prepare breakfast for her husband, James, and their two kids, Mia and Noah. Over the years, she had perfected her routine. Sunny side-up eggs for James, pancakes for Noah, and toast with jam for Mia. The house was filled with the comforting aroma of breakfast, but as Sarah set the plates on the table that morning, James barely glanced up from his phone. "Try not to overcook the eggs next time," he muttered, not even bothering to taste them. His words cut through the quiet like a blade, leaving Sarah blinking back her disappointment. The children exchanged uneasy glances. 10-year-old Mia, ever the peacemaker, tried to break the silence with cheerful chatter about her school project, but the tension lingered, heavy and unspoken. James drained his coffee, mumbled something about a busy day at work, and left without a goodbye. Standing at the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, Sarah stared blankly out the window as the morning sunlight spilled into the kitchen. She felt like a shadow in her own home, unseen and unimportant. Later that day, Sarah couldn't shake off the sting of the morning's events. It wasn't just the offhand comment about the eggs. It was the culmination of countless similar remarks over the years. James, who had once been kind and supportive, now seemed bitter and dismissive. He no longer saw her as an equal partner, but as someone there to cater to his needs. Shaking her head, Sarah pushed the thoughts aside and busied herself with preparing dinner. But even as she chopped vegetables and laid out the table, a hollow ache settled in her chest, refusing to be ignored. Dinner brought no solace. James arrived late, blaming work meetings, and barely touched the meal she had worked hard to prepare. When Noah excitedly showed off his latest art project, James responded with a disinterested, "That's nice." Anger bubbled within Sarah, but she swallowed it, reminding herself of the promise she had made years ago to keep the family intact at all costs. As the rest of the family retreated for the night, Sarah sat alone in the dimly lit living room, questioning whether her sacrifices were truly worth it. The tension reached a breaking point during a dinner party James hosted for his colleagues. Sarah spent hours cleaning and decorating the house, ensuring everything was perfect. She wore her best dress, hoping to make a good impression and show her unwavering support for James's career. The evening began with polite laughter and the clinking of glasses, but when one of James's colleagues asked Sarah what she did, James answered before she could. "She's a homemaker," he said with a patronizing chuckle. "You know, keeps the house running while I handle the important stuff." The words stung more than Sarah expected. Forcing a smile, she pretended the comment hadn't bothered her as the conversation moved on. James's colleagues laughed along, oblivious to the insult laced in his tone. Retreating to the kitchen under the guise of checking on dessert, Sarah fought back the tears. The humiliation clung to her like a heavy cloak, weighing her down. After the guests left, Sarah confronted James. "Why would you say something like that?" she asked, her voice trembling with hurt. James shrugged dismissively. "You're overreacting, Sarah. Don't be so sensitive." His indifference struck her harder than the initial insult, leaving her feeling smaller than ever. Weeks passed, and the memory of that evening became just another addition to the growing pile of indignities Sarah endured. James's dismissiveness wasn't limited to their private moments. It seeped into every aspect of their lives. At the grocery store, he would roll his eyes when she carefully checked prices. At family gatherings, he'd make comments about how lucky she was to have a husband who provided for her. Over time, Sarah withdrew, finding solace only in the quiet moments she shared with Mia and Noah. As Noah was tucked into bed that evening, his innocent question broke Sarah's composure. "Mom, why doesn't Dad listen to you?" he asked softly. Sarah froze, her hand pausing mid-air over the blanket. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Noah shrugged, his small face scrunched in confusion. "He talks like you're not there," he replied simply. Sarah kissed his forehead, murmuring a gentle good night, but tears pricked at her eyes as she left the room. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, a blank sheet of paper in front of her. Hours passed as she wrestled with her thoughts, her pen hovering indecisively. Finally, the words began to flow, as if a dam had burst, spilling her heart onto the page. "I can't do this anymore," she wrote. "I've given everything I have, but it's never enough for you." She folded the letter neatly, placed it on the kitchen counter beside her wedding ring, and quietly packed a small bag. Sarah's departure was silent, unnoticed until James stumbled upon the note the next morning. The house was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of Sarah bustling about and the comforting smell of breakfast conspicuously absent. James picked up the note, his brow furrowing as he read her words. "She'll be back," he muttered, tossing the letter aside, unwilling to process the gravity of her departure. But as the days turned into weeks, the weight of Sarah's absence began to settle heavily over the household. A pang of guilt flickered as he read her words again, but he quickly buried it. "She just needs to cool off," he told himself, unwilling to confront the possibility that he might have driven her away. The children, however, sensed the change. "Where's Mom?" Mia asked one morning, her voice trembling. James hesitated, scrambling for a response that wouldn't upset them. "She needed a little break," he said finally, avoiding their worried gazes. That evening, as he sat in the quiet house, staring at Sarah's empty chair, the unease he had been suppressing began to creep in. Later that night, James reread Sarah's letter. This time, the meaning behind her words began to sink in. "I've felt invisible for years. I've given everything to this family, but you've made me feel like I don't matter." Her pain was undeniable. James frowned, trying to pinpoint specific moments that could have caused such feelings. Sure, he'd been dismissive at times, but wasn't that just the pressure of work? Didn't she understand that he valued her? As he carefully folded the letter and set it back on the counter, an unfamiliar sense of regret began to take root. For the first time, James realized how much of their life together Sarah had carried silently, her presence seamlessly woven into every part of their home and family. Now, in her absence, the threads of that tapestry were starting to unravel. James began to reflect, sifting through memories he had previously dismissed. The dinner party, the mornings when Sarah prepared meals without complaint, and the countless sacrifices she had made for the family. Yet, he clung to his pride. "She's overreacting," he told himself, though the words felt hollow. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah still hadn't returned. James carried on with his routine, pretending nothing had changed, but cracks in his carefully constructed facade began to show. Laundry piled up, the children's school forms went unsigned, and meals devolved into rushed takeout orders. At work, his colleagues noticed his distracted demeanor. "Just a family thing," he'd say with a forced smile, brushing off their concern. Deep down, he waited for the door to open, for Sarah to return and resume her role in the home. He reassured himself that her absence was temporary, that she only needed time. But when he found Noah crying in his room one evening, clutching a drawing he had made for Sarah, James's denial began to crumble. "Why isn't Mother coming back, Dad?" Noah sobbed. James knelt beside him, at a loss for words. For the first time, he wondered if he had pushed Sarah too far. The house descended into disarray without Sarah. James tried to juggle work, chores, and parenting, but the effort quickly overwhelmed him. One night, he burned dinner, much to Noah's dismay. Another morning, he forgot to pack Mia's lunch. "This is harder than it looks," he muttered, frustration boiling over. But as he struggled, he began to see the invisible threads Sarah had woven into their lives. Managing the budget, scheduling the kids' activities, and even ensuring clean clothes suddenly seemed monumental tasks without her. Apologies became frequent, directed at his children, his boss, and even the PDA members he forgot to email. For the first time, James began to respect the enormity of Sarah's contributions. "She made this look so easy," he admitted one night, staring at the cluttered kitchen table. The evenings grew quieter as the children retreated to bed earlier, their moods dampened by Sarah's absence. In the stillness, James's thoughts wandered to the moments he had ignored. The nights Sarah stayed up late sewing Mia's costumes, the way she always anticipated Noah's needs, and the evenings she waited for James to come home, only to be met with his indifference. These memories gnawed at him, each one a painful reminder of how blind he had been to her efforts. One evening, seeking a distraction, James ventured into the attic. Amidst forgotten boxes, he unearthed an old photo album. Flipping through its pages, he saw a younger, happier version of himself and Sarah. Her radiant smile and hopeful eyes stared back at him, and as he traced her face with his finger, a lump formed in his throat. How had they drifted so far apart? He wondered. And more importantly, could he fix what he had broken? While searching for a missing sock in the laundry room, James stumbled upon a note tucked between detergent bottles. Written in Sarah's neat handwriting, it read, "Don't forget to use the cold cycle for delicates." It was a simple reminder, but the sight of it brought tears to his eyes. The note wasn't just practical. It was a small fragment of the care and attention Sarah had poured into their lives. As the days went by, James began to stumble across more notes hidden in unexpected places. In the pantry, under the couch cushions, even tucked into the kids' backpacks. Each one was a quiet testament to how deeply Sarah had cared for their family. One note, taped to the inside of the refrigerator, stopped him in his tracks. It read, "Remember to always encourage the kids. They're trying their best, even when it doesn't seem like it." James clutched the note, his chest tightening. These weren't just practical reminders. They were fragments of Sarah's love, scattered like breadcrumbs in the life she had left behind. For the first time, James felt the full weight of her absence, and it was crushing. He noticed the growing distance between himself and the children. Mia had stopped asking for help with her school projects, and Noah spent hours alone in his room. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Mia finally broke the silence. "Why did Mom leave?" she asked bluntly, her eyes brimming with tears. James looked up from his plate, caught off guard. "She needed some time," he said weakly. But Mia wasn't convinced. "Is it because of you?" she pressed. Noah, who had been silent until then, added, "You're always mad at her. You never say thank you. She probably got tired of it." Their words pierced James like daggers. He wanted to deny it, to explain that it wasn't entirely his fault, but deep down, he knew they were right. The children's honesty forced him to confront the harsh truth. His actions, or lack thereof, had driven Sarah away. Desperate for answers, James decided to visit Sarah's parents. The drive to their house felt longer than usual, his thoughts racing with anxiety. When Sarah's mother opened the door, her expression was a mix of surprise and disapproval. "She's not here," she said curtly. But James stepped inside anyway, pleading for a chance to talk. Over tea, Sarah's mother revealed how Sarah had often called her in tears, sharing the struggles she faced at home. "She didn't want to leave the kids, James," her mother said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "But she felt like she didn't have a choice. You didn't see what you had, and now you might have lost it for good." James left their house feeling more alone than ever, the weight of his guilt growing heavier with each passing moment. One sleepless night, James found himself sorting through Sarah's belongings, hoping to feel some connection to her. Among the books and keepsakes in the closet, he discovered a small leather-bound journal. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he had the right to read something so personal, but his longing for understanding outweighed his hesitation. The entries painted a vivid picture of Sarah's life over the past few years, her joys, her fears, and the deep sadness she had hidden so well. "Today, James called me useless again," one entry read. "I wonder if he even remembers the woman he married, the one who dreamed of building a life together. I miss feeling like his partner." Tears streamed down James's face as he read page after page of her pain. The journal was a mirror, reflecting a version of himself he had refused to see. The journal became a turning point for James. He couldn't erase the past, but he resolved to change the future. Slowly, he began taking on the tasks Sarah had once handled effortlessly, from managing the household budget to cooking meals for the kids. Each effort was an acknowledgement of the work Sarah had done and an attempt to rebuild the trust he had shattered. Every chore reminded James of Sarah's quiet strength and patience. While navigating these tasks, he also began reflecting deeply on his behavior. Determined to address the patterns that had driven Sarah away, he sought the guidance of a counselor. "If she ever comes back," he told the counselor, "I want to be someone she's proud to call her husband." It wasn't just about winning Sarah back. It was about becoming a better father and a better man. Weeks passed, and James finally caught a break. While sorting through a box of old receipts, he stumbled upon a train ticket Sarah had purchased the day she left. It was for a small town a few hours away. His heart raced at the thought of finding her, explaining everything, and bringing her home. The idea filled him with equal parts hope and fear. Early the next morning, James packed a bag and set off. As he navigated the winding country roads, he rehearsed what he would say. "I was wrong," he murmured to himself. "I see it now. I see you." When he arrived at the small town's train station and asked around, no one had seen Sarah. His hope dimmed, but he resolved not to give up. Over the next few weeks, James visited shelters, libraries, and even small cafes in the area, showing Sarah's photo to anyone willing to look. Each time, the answer was the same: "Sorry, I haven't seen her." The frustration and despair were nearly unbearable, but James pressed on, driven by his need to make amends. One particularly discouraging day, James sat on a park bench, clutching Sarah's photo. A homeless man nearby noticed his distress and asked, "Looking for someone?" James nodded and shared Sarah's story. The man's response lingered in James's mind. "If she's running, it's not from you. It's towards something she needs. Maybe you should find that first." Just when James was beginning to lose hope, he received an unexpected call from one of Sarah's old friends. "I saw her," the woman said. "She's volunteering at a women's shelter in the city." James's heart leapt at the news, but the friend's tone was cautious. "She looked happy, James. Don't go there unless you're ready to really listen to her." Grateful yet apprehensive, James spent the next few days preparing himself for the encounter. He understood this wasn't about convincing Sarah to come home, but about proving that he had changed. When James arrived at the shelter, he spotted Sarah almost immediately. She was helping a young mother with her baby, her face calm and radiant in a way he hadn't seen in years. He hesitated, unsure if he should interrupt, but when Sarah turned and their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. Sarah approached him slowly, her expression cautious. "What are you doing here, James?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. James took a deep breath, his voice trembling with emotion. "I came to say I'm sorry. Not to ask you to come back, but to tell you that I finally see what I've done." Sarah listened in silence, her face unreadable, as James poured out his heart. He didn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, he acknowledged her pain and the ways he had failed her. Whether she forgave him or not, he was determined to let her know how much she mattered. After their conversation, Sarah handed James a sealed envelope before turning to walk away. "Read this when you're ready," she said, her voice steady yet distant. James clutched the envelope tightly as he returned to his car, too overwhelmed to open it just yet. Overwhelmed with emotions, James couldn't bring himself to open the letter immediately. That night, as he sat alone in the quiet of his living room, he finally unfolded the paper with trembling hands. Inside, Sarah poured out her feelings, the depth of her pain and the reasons she had left. "I didn't want to walk away from the life we built, but I couldn't stay and lose myself in the process. If I truly matter to you, don't try to fix this with quick words or promises. Show me, through your actions, that you've changed." James read the letter over and over, each sentence striking him harder than the last. Yet, buried in her words, he saw a glimmer of hope. Sarah wasn't shutting him out completely. She was offering him a chance to prove he could be better. Determined to honor her wishes, James shifted his focus inward, ready to transform himself. He started by working to rebuild his connection with Noah and Mia. He made it a priority to truly listen and be present in their lives. When Mia needed help with a science project, James sat with her for hours at the kitchen table, cutting and gluing cardboard pieces. When Noah wanted to toss a ball in the backyard, James set aside his work, even though he hadn't played sports in years. At first, the children were hesitant, unsure if this version of their father was here to stay. But gradually, they began to let their guard down. One evening, Mia hugged him tightly, whispering, "I miss Mom, but I'm glad you're trying, Dad." Those words stayed with James, fueling his determination to keep improving. He realized that his efforts weren't just about bringing Sarah back. It was about becoming the father and person he should have been all along. James also began to handle the countless tasks Sarah had once managed effortlessly. He learned how to budget their household expenses, marveling at the thought and care Sarah had put into every dollar. Grocery shopping became an eye-opening experience as he wandered the aisles, unsure of the kids' favorite brands or how to choose fresh produce. One morning, he burned an entire batch of pancakes, only to laugh at the chaos in the kitchen. He could almost imagine Sarah shaking her head with an amused smile. James also tackled his emotional shortcomings. Weekly counseling sessions helped him unpack the resentment and dismissiveness he had directed at Sarah over the years. "I always thought providing financially was enough," he admitted to his counselor, "but I didn't give her the respect and love she deserved." Slowly, James began to reshape his understanding of what it meant to be a real partner. With time, James grew closer to Mia and Noah in ways he hadn't anticipated. Family dinners returned, with James encouraging them to share their highs and lows from the day. Mia confided in him about a classmate who had been bullying her, while Noah began drawing pictures just for him, proudly presenting them after school. The house, though quieter without Sarah, began to feel warmer and more alive. One evening, as they sat watching a movie together, Noah suddenly turned to James with a question that caught him off guard. "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" James paused before answering. He didn't shy away from the truth. "I hope so," he said softly, "but if she doesn't, it's because I didn't treat her the way she deserved. That's why I'm working hard to be better, for her, and for both of you." Noah nodded thoughtfully, leaning his head against James, as the room filled with a quiet understanding. James's transformation wasn't confined to just his home life. At work, he began advocating for better recognition of homemakers and caregivers. During a staff meeting, he shared a story about Sarah's sacrifices. "My wife ran our household like a well-oiled machine," he said. "I never gave her credit because I didn't see the effort behind it. But I see it now, and I'm ashamed it took losing her to realize it." His honesty struck a chord with his coworkers, many of whom opened up about their own struggles balancing work and family. James also made changes to his own habits. He refused to stay late at the office unless absolutely necessary and prioritized family time. He started scheduling his workday around the kids' activities, making sure he was present for their milestones. For the first time, his career no longer overshadowed his responsibilities at home. Months passed, and just as James began to accept the possibility that Sarah might never return, she appeared at the door one evening. Mia and Noah rushed to greet her, their excitement palpable. James stood frozen, unsure of what to say or do. Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I came to see the kids," she said softly, her tone neutral but firm. James nodded, stepping aside to let her in. He watched as she embraced the children, her laughter filling the house once again. For the first time in months, the home felt complete. But Sarah's visit wasn't a reconciliation. It was a test. She observed how James interacted with the kids, how he handled the household, and whether his changes were genuine. James didn't try to impress her. He simply continued living the new life he had built. Before Sarah left that evening, James asked if they could talk. They sat in the living room, the tension thick between them. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," James began, his voice trembling. "But I need you to know that I see everything now. The things you did, the sacrifices you made, and how much I failed you. I'm sorry, Sarah, not just for the past, but for every moment I made you feel invisible." Sarah listened silently, her expression unreadable. When James finished, she took a deep breath. "I've heard apologies before," Sarah said, "but what I see now, your relationship with the kids, the way you've taken responsibility, that means more than words ever could." Her words weren't a promise of reconciliation, but they gave James a glimmer of hope. After Sarah's visit, James was filled with cautious optimism. He continued to focus on being a better father and maintaining the home, resisting the urge to reach out to Sarah directly. Meanwhile, Sarah wrestled with her emotions. Seeing the changes in James stirred something in her. Hope, perhaps, but it was tangled with years of pain and mistrust. She confided in a friend from the shelter. "He's trying. I can see that. But I'm scared. What if it's temporary? What if he reverts to the man who made me feel like I didn't matter?" Her friend nodded thoughtfully. "It's okay to be cautious, Sarah. Change takes time, and trust takes even longer. You're allowed to protect yourself." Sarah decided she wouldn't rush back into the life she had left, but she also wouldn't close the door entirely. Weeks later, Sarah called James. Her voice was calm, but there was a noticeable shift in Sarah's tone. "I'd like to have dinner with you and the kids," she said. James's heart raced, but he kept his response steady. "We'd love that," he replied. That evening, he prepared Sarah's favorite dish and made sure the house was spotless. Mia and Noah were overjoyed, buzzing with excitement at the thought of having their family together again, even if just for one night. The dinner was filled with laughter and warmth, but there were still a few awkward moments. Sarah observed how James handled the kids' arguments and noticed his efforts to include her in the conversation without dominating it. As Sarah left that evening, she turned to James. "This was nice," she said softly. James nodded, his heart swelling with hope. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice sincere. "It means everything to us, to me." Over the next few months, Sarah began visiting more frequently. These weren't just social calls. They were opportunities for her to see if the James she was witnessing now was the same man who had driven her away. Slowly, she began to let her guard down. One afternoon, as they were cleaning up after lunch, she asked him, "Why now? Why couldn't you have been like this before?" James paused, his hands stilling over the dishes. "Because I was blind, Sarah. I thought I was doing enough by providing for the family. I didn't realize that what you gave us, your time, your love, your sacrifices, was worth more than anything I could ever earn. Losing you opened my eyes, and I don't want to go back to who I was." His honesty moved Sarah. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was real, and it was enough to take another step toward healing. A year later, Sarah moved back into the home. Though this time, things were different. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and open communication, with James actively sharing the responsibilities of parenting and household management. Mia and Noah thrived under the renewed sense of unity, and Sarah felt like she had regained not only her place in the family, but also her sense of self. One evening, as the family sat around the living room, Mia asked, "Mom, why did you leave? And why did you come back?" Sarah looked at James, who nodded, encouraging her to share. "I left because I felt invisible," she said gently. "And I came back because I saw that your dad worked hard to change." "We're all learning how to be better together," James added. "The most important lesson I've learned is to never take someone's efforts for granted. Everyone deserves to feel valued and loved." As the family huddled together, Sarah realized that while their journey had been painful, it had also led them to something stronger, a partnership built on trust, respect, and love. Thank you for taking the time to watch today's story. For more meaningful stories, please subscribe to our channel. Your support is our great motivation. Goodbye and see you again in the next stories.